I personally don't take a lot of risks. I don't jump out of airplanes for recreation, swallow swords, and I'm not a desulter. But on second thought, I do take some risks now and again, and I know you do too. It's whenever I'm buying a watch from a secondary source. Hello again, watch friends and fellow anoraks. Welcome back to Watch Thoughts. Some periodic comments on watch-related things I find interesting or just want to share. If you're new to my channel and want to learn about watches, watch collecting, and the like, be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the bell to be notified of new uploads. Allow me to tell you about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the great in my watch buying experience over the last couple of years. So let's start with the good. I knew that Girard-Perregaux was a brand I should be interested in and decided I wanted one of their pieces. Girard-Perregaux makes some excellent movements, and some of their calibers have been used in other brands' watches in the last century. But the question was, which watch would I choose? One that had an excellent movement and one that I could afford. Two important criteria for any watch collector thinking of adding to their collection. I decided on a vintage watch with the Gyromatic movement and found several on eBay and Chrono24. Since I've had mixed results buying on eBay and previously good results on Chrono24, I went with the Chrono24 option because the prices seemed reasonable and the seller said that the watch was recently serviced. Plus, the listing had plenty of pictures, which is usually a good sign. Unfortunately, when the watch arrived, it was defective. It wouldn't keep time for more than 12 hours. And over the course of 3 days, it continued to have the same problem. When I contacted the seller in Germany, he said I should have it serviced locally, and he would pay for it. Taking it to my local Rolex dealer, watchmaker, I was told that this particular vintage Girard-Perregaux had to go back to the manufacturer to be serviced in Switzerland, a very expensive and time-consuming option that would exceed the $800 I paid for the watch. The seller allowed me to return the watch, even though they said I should have had it fixed locally, and it cost me $62 in shipping back to Germany. I fully expected the seller to refund the purchase price and the return shipping because the watch was defective. The seller received the watch and said it was a loose screw and that the screw came loose during shipping. Well, that seems suspect to me. If the watch was recently serviced like the seller claimed, how could a screw come loose? And who knows what else could have been wrong on the watch? Although the seller refunded the purchase price, they refused to refund the return shipping, and Chrono24 was of no help at all. I mistakenly thought Chrono24 would support their buyers. After quite a few back-and-forth emails, I couldn't get the seller to budge, so I filed a dispute with my credit card company, saying that I shouldn't be responsible for the shipping charge for someone sending me a defective watch. Ultimately, Capital One refunded me the $62, and I'm not sure if I had used PayPal if I would have had been supported like this. So this had a good ending, but even if you do your due diligence, ask many questions, request or view pictures, things can still go wrong. I was lucky Capital One came through for me. And now the bad. The Maurice LaCroix MP7009 Masterpiece. Over the last couple of years, I've become quite enamored with tonneau-style watches. You know, a watch that has more or less a rectangular shape, which is, depending on the dial and hands, reminiscent of men's watches from the 1930s and 1940s. For me, they are akin to the Art Deco design style, of which I am very fond. When I first saw Bill Sanders' Maurice LaCroix Masterpiece Rectangulaire Petite Seconde watch, that's a mouthful, which reminded me of my Parmigiani Calpa, but was still unique in its own way, I knew I had to have it for a couple of reasons. The chief reason was the beautiful movement, the ML126 La Girard-Perregaux movement. One would not expect a high-end caliber. The caliber 736 movement was developed by Jean-Pierre Jacquet on an entry-level luxury watch. This is a manual wind Jacquet movement that beats at 21,600 vibrations per hour and has an oversized balance. The elongated design, which conforms to the dimensions of the case, also permits the use of a relatively large barrel, which benefits both power reserve and accuracy. The other reason I wanted the Masterpiece MP7009 was the dial. Very elegant, classy, and true to the Art Deco style I admire. It even reminded me a little of JLC's Reverso in a way. The small second subdial at 6 o'clock appears to be a retrograde complication, but it isn't. The innovative semicircular segment design of the small seconds dial has a hand with one short and one long end. The short end of the hand is responsible for the first 30 seconds, and the long end is for the second half of the minute. The clever way to remember this is the short end points to the scale on the inside of the track, and the long end, where the dial actually extends to the outer scales, is for the second half of the minute as shown on the subdial. Very cool. And I recently learned Parmigiani Fleurier has a model with a similar small seconds arrangement. It's called the Calpa Chronor. So the bad news was that when the watch arrived, it's starting to sound like a familiar story, when the watch arrived, it was losing about 5 minutes per day. At the time I bought this watch, there were several available on Chrono 24 in the $1,300 price range. That's about what I paid from a French dealer who said the watch was, quote-unquote, recently serviced and was working fine when he sent it. A likely story. Anyway, the seller said I could send it back and he would refund the costs but not the shipping. This back-and-forth email exchange took place over the course of a couple weeks, and by the end of the exchange, these same watches were going for about $1,800 to $2,000 on Chrono 24. I'm not sure why the prices increased. So I made what I thought was a relatively practical decision. Rather than sending the watch back, having to eat the shipping cost, and trying to buy another example of the same piece, and not knowing ahead of time if it would be in any better mechanical condition, and I'd have to buy it at a higher price, I sent the watch to Federico's watchmaker, Hans, who charged his usual rate of $450 for a full service. Apparently a broken screw was responsible for the poor accuracy. The reason this is in the bad category is that the service cost me an extra $450 for this watch. However, one way to look at it is that I got the watch I wanted for about $1,800, the going rate at the time, and a watch that was recently serviced by Hans and in mechanical sound condition. Perhaps not as great a deal as I initially envisioned, but maybe it wasn't so bad after all. And now the ugly, the Stowa 1941 vintage. I've always liked Stowa, a well-known German brand of watches that have been around for a century or so. This Engelsbrand Germany-based company makes primarily Flieger, Bauhaus, and chronograph watches. Since the turn of the 21st century, their business model is to sell directly to the consumer, thus cutting out the middleman or middlewoman and saving the watch buyer some money. The brand name comes from Storz Walter Stowa, who was the founder. The current owner is Jörg Schauer. A couple of years ago, I was looking for a vintage watch, and I found this 1940s era Stowa Antea. Antea is what they now call their line of Bauhaus watches. And by the way, happy birthday, Bauhaus School of Design. You're 100 years old today. Stowa was one of the first watch companies that incorporated Bauhaus design into their watches, and I was thrilled to find this piece. This is a smallish automatic watch with the original, and much preferred by me, Stowa logo. I bought it off eBay and from a seller who had high ratings, plenty of pictures, and a description of the watch that led me to believe he knew what he was doing. Well, he knew what he was doing all right, ripping me off. The watch was billed as an automatic, but I noticed that it wasn't keeping good time when I got it. So I sent it to a watchmaker I trusted to diagnose and fix the problem. Well, the problem was simple. There was no rotor. It had been removed. So the watch was no longer an automatic watch. The seller refused to refund my money and claimed he didn't know anything. Sure. But my solution was imaginative, if I dare say so. I asked the watchmaker to turn this watch into a manual wind piece. And he did. I know, it was no longer original. Apparently it wasn't original when I bought it either. So I now have an attractive 1940s era Stowa Bauhaus piece that, although it has had some major surgery, keeps relatively good time and is a pleasure to wear. I really like it, and I'll bet not many watch collectors have an automatic manual, or should I say a manual automatic watch. It was an ugly experience because the seller ripped me off, and I had little recourse. All it did was make me even more leery of eBay. I hope you stayed with me so far, because now we come to my favorite part of the stories. The Parmigiani Fleurier bracelet repair. It's no secret that I'm a big fan of Michael Parmigiani and the Parmigiani watch brand. I own two pieces, a Kalpa and a Hebdomadaire. And I could see owning a third someday if the right one came along. I did a review of each of these, and I'll put a link to each one above. Probably my favorite Parmigiani, and also one of my most favorite watches in my collection, is the Hebdomadaire. The word literally means weekly in French, and that's exactly what you get. 8 days of power from the double barrel system, and a hand-wound caliber PF 110. Because of the double barrels, the power is steady and there's no isochronism problems that could impact the accuracy of the watch. Fittingly, last year I was on vacation in France for 2 weeks, and this is the only watch I brought with me. It kept near perfect time, and I only had to wind it once while I was away. I could go on and on about the beautiful champagne-colored guilloche sunray pattern on the dial, or the 4 levels on the dial: the main dial, the inset small second sub-dial, power reserve indicator, and date window, which adds a high degree of visual interest and provides a balanced three-dimensional aesthetic to the watch. Or I could even talk about the story behind how Parmigiani watches came to be, how Michael Parmigiani got his start as a watchmaker restoring antique watches, and then went on to manage the Sandoz Family Foundation watch collection, and how they, the Sandoz Foundation, were so impressed with him that the family decided to back him to create his own line of watches, which he did almost 20 years ago. And finally, that Michael Parmigiani is recognized as one of the premier independent watchmakers. All this is true, and are interesting facts in themselves. But I want to talk about the exemplary service I received from the Parmigiani Fleurier boutique in Miami, Florida. Here's what happened. A couple of months ago, I was wearing the Hebdo for the better part of a week. I think you can relate to sometimes changing up a watch every day to suit a mood, or sticking with a certain piece because it just looks so damn good on your wrist. It was the latter circumstance, and when arriving home after work, the watch felt a little loose on my wrist. This was in late winter, so I had on a sweater and a jacket. I thought, oh, maybe the catch came loose. Never did before, though. Well, when I rolled up the sleeve, I noticed the bracelet had a broken link, and the watch was ready to fall from my wrist. Spoiler alert, it didn't fall, not even close. I could have tried going to a New York City authorized dealer to get help, but that would have been a hit-or-miss proposition. Plus, a friend had recently gotten good response from the Parmigiani boutique in Miami. So I contacted them, explained the problem, and sent a photo. They promptly replied to send it to them so an estimate could be given. I did, and they quoted $120, I think, which I thought was a fair price. So I said, go ahead, please fix it. About 3 weeks later, Giulio called me back and said Parmigiani HQ was now saying they can't fix the bracelet and that I'd have to buy an entirely new bracelet. He thought that was unacceptable and told me he would talk with HQ. Well, Giulio certainly did and convinced the management that this was no way to provide customer service, especially for a brand like Parmigiani and to a loyal client. In the end, the boutique replaced the bracelet and shipped it back to me at no charge. That's the kind of customer service one would expect from a premium brand. I would have been happy just to get the bracelet fixed for the quoted $120. This is why I call this a great experience. The Parmigiani Hebdomadaire exudes quality in every aspect. Dial, case, movement, and of course, superior customer service. Thank you, Giulio, for your help, and thank you, Parmigiani. So, the journey of a watch collector is always interesting. One never knows when your watch buying experience will be good, bad, ugly, or great. So be careful out there. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share with your watch friends and fellow watch anoraks, and subscribe if you already haven't, so as to be alerted of new watch-related uploads. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.